Welcome back to the Deep 404. Ukraine's running out of men is what seems to be happening at the moment. It's dreadful news for the people of Ukraine. I can't imagine being in a conflict like they are, up against your neighbour. We've had close relations for many years, and being led into a fight by some other third-party nation, one which is just grinding your country away, leaving your young men and now young women dead on the front lines of the country that you love. It's a terrible situation. There is a Ukrainian channel which I've been following, and they've provided some information about this, which I'll just read through a little bit of this. They're suggesting that this is a Ukrainian channel suggesting that October of 2023 has become the first month during the conflict where there has been, in terms of mobilisation for Ukraine, a net deficit. So there has been a shortage in the number of people mobilised in October compared to the losses that were given. Now, the example that's given here isn't, I don't believe this is the actual numbers, but it's just an indication. They're saying that if the losses were 10,000 killed, wounded and decommissioned in October, then only 5,700 people were called up. They're reporting that the October shortfall in mobilisation for Ukraine is more than 43%. So in October, Ukraine were not able to mobilise enough people to cover the losses they suffered in that month. Now, this Ukrainian Telegram channel are reporting, the indications are that November also is expected to be deficient in terms of mobilisation, due to the growing losses for the Ukrainian armed forces. And those losses are growing. They're attributing part of the reasons here due to a policy of attempting to conserve and save ammunition. This will primarily be 155mm shells that they're talking about. Just on that topic, I want to just make up for a mistake I made in yesterday's reporting where I was talking about 150mm shells. 155mm shells is what I meant. So this is why we're seeing such a big push at the moment in Ukraine for mobilisation of forces, because the losses they are suffering now are growing due to a shortage in ammunition and a desire to try to conserve that ammunition. The Financial Times is reporting that the Ukrainian armed forces need younger soldiers because the current average age of the military is too high. Now, that's an interesting statement in itself. It's suggesting that the current military age is too high. Would be, why is it too high? There's an average age of your military based upon the age of the people that you have in your military. The Financial Times then suggests that this is due to the fact that the conflict has shifted to the level of small infantry battles on foot and in trench systems. So perhaps again what the Financial Times is saying here reflects what the Ukrainian Telegram channel is suggesting, is that because Ukraine is attempting to conserve artillery and conserve armour, so armoured vehicles, they are now left only with the options of sending small groups of men out on foot to fight for positions without the protection and cover of armoured vehicles like tanks and armoured personnel carriers, and without adequate artillery protection. So the Ukrainian armed forces are unable to push Russian forces back, suppress Russian artillery, and instead, when they make these small advances, the Ukrainian men are able to be attacked by Russian artillery and by FPV drones. And that this is these small infantry battles on foot and in trench systems is causing the loss of men. still doesn't answer the real question as to why the current average age of the military is too high. Now, I think we know why that reason is. We've discussed this, I think, in a number of times in the past. The fact that the average age of the Ukrainian armed forces over the last year has increased from an average age of 27 to an average age of 43 is because the young men have been consumed and lost in this battle already. There were some reports yesterday of a Ukrainian television channel showing along the leader, the banner at the bottom of the news report, that over 1,125,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed, wounded, or are missing in this conflict. Now, that's not a number that has been announced anywhere publicly, and reportedly the television station that showed that had to make an apology to Bankover, had to make an apology to the Zelensky government, and indicate that they had made a mistake and it was a typo, it was an error. A lot of people are wondering if that was a typo and an error, or if that was someone rebelling to some extent and attempting to get the news out there. I can't say what those numbers are. That number seems very high to me. Even if we were to take like the Russian Ministry of Defense figures, where they give their estimations of the lost and killed and wounded each day, based upon even those figures, I think you're probably looking at a figure closer to 500,000. But anyhow, with those numbers of 500,000, we see why the average age is moving up. You start your army generally with a lot of young men in there. They're looking for work. They don't have another job. They're easy to conscript when in peacetime. You've got a lot of young blokes in there. Seems like a lot of them have been lost. The average age is going up. So this Financial Times article suggesting that the Ukrainian armed forces needs younger soldiers because the current age is too high, I think they're looking at this the wrong way round. I think they should be writing that Ukraine has lost all its young soldiers and this is pushing the average age up. Royal United Services Institute senior fellow Jack Watland says the armed forces have mobilised a disproportionate number of older men this year, and what is now needed is younger men with more staying power. Again, I think they're missing the forest for the trees here, or they got the wrong end of the stick. I don't think that there has been a conscious effort to mobilise a disproportionate number of older men and leave the young men out. I think there are less young men around to be mobilised. Again, another Ukrainian channel here just suggesting what may be or backing up, concurring that the reason is here. They are saying that the General Staff of Ukraine has said that the problem is with attack aircraft. Is the most pressing thing for the Ukrainian armed forces because due to the strategy of preserving equipment, we are forced to send infantry to attack on foot, as a result of which we have very heavy losses and urgently need to recruit new reserves. So this added to the news we've had in the last week or so of and confirmation video footage of Ukrainian women at the front line, a Ukrainian woman who was at the front line and captured, and then claiming that she was pregnant when she was captured by the Russians, and video footage of a woman in a trench which was sounding as though it was about to be overrun by a Russian tank. So certainly the Ukrainians are now forced to mobilise women into their frontline combat units. There's also reports of mercenaries having enough and giving up. The reports coming from Slavyangrad. Again, this is a Russian Telegram channel, but a very reliable Telegram channel, and a great source of news. Slavyangrad have reporting that according to information they are receiving, Quoting from them, many mercenaries from Georgia and Poland are leaving Kleshchevka. Now, Kleshchevka is just south of Bakhmut, or what the Ukrainians call Artyomovsk. The Russians call Artyomovsk. This is a city that has been fought for brutally over the last 6 months, and the Russians, with the help of the Wagner forces, conquered Bakhmut some time ago, back in May. The Ukrainian summer offensive, a big push was to try to recapture Bakhmut. That was unsuccessful. And the township of Kleshchevka to the south of Bakhmut became important because had Ukraine been able to capture it, there was a train line, the elevated train line that ran up from Kleshchevka into the southern parts of Bakhmut, and would have provided some level of access and protection and high ground for the Ukrainians to then mount an attack on southern Bakhmut and try to reclaim some of Bakhmut that way. That wasn't successful, and now we have had reporting in the last few days that the gains that were made by Ukraine in Kleshchevka have been unwound by the Russian forces, and the Russian forces are now pushing back and reclaiming Kleshchevka. This report suggesting that mercenaries from Georgia and Poland are leaving Kleshchevka. The report says they go out in groups of 10 or 15 people. They just give up. Pardon me. And this indicating the reporting is recent here. Many of them have varying degrees of frostbite. We are starting to get reports from areas across the front line of soldiers suffering frostbite. Primarily the reports I have heard of that are relating to Ukrainian soldiers fighting and starting to suffer frostbite. There's certainly video coming out now showing positions across the front line deep in snow. So the cold weather has arrived. If this sets in and becomes a particularly cold winter, then it will be devastating to the Ukrainian morale to be being constantly under Russian pressure, being overwhelmed in terms of artillery and equipment, being pushed back by growing numbers of Russian forces along the front line, and then having to deal with restricted supply lines, inability to rotate troops and keep them fresh, all the while dealing with freezing conditions, difficulty heating food and preparing food, and then things such as frostbite. It will become quite difficult for them. In terms of the Abrams, which I mentioned, now there have been 2 reports I've seen over the last week of Abrams tanks appearing in the Kupiansk area. There was an additional photograph I saw yesterday, reportedly, of an Abrams tank in the Kupiansk direction, painted up in a woodland-style camouflage. There is an unconfirmed report that I have seen earlier today. So I've only seen this in one location at this stage, so I can't confirm that this is true, but it is a report that a number of Abrams tanks may have been destroyed while they were on a transport convoy. So if I see more about this, I'll report on it again tomorrow to try to confirm or deny this one, but there is some reporting that there may have been some Abrams tanks destroyed as part of a missile attack on a transport convoy. There is also, now that pictures are starting to appear of them in the Kupiansk area, there are reports that there is such a bounty being placed upon the Abrams that, jokingly, Ukrainian deserters, when they are captured, are threatened with being sent to Kupiansk to become tankers, to become tank drivers in Abrams and Leopards, because it is considered by the Ukrainians to effectively be a death sentence if you're put into one of those tanks, because they will be hunted. They're such a trophy for the Russians to be able to claim that they've destroyed an Abrams or a Leopard tank. In the Zaporozhye front, near Robotne and Verbova, along that Robotne, Novoprokopovka and Verbova line. There are reports of Russian assaults, capturing and defeating scores of Ukrainian soldiers along this line. There has been very heavy fighting in Robotne and Verbova, and it is due in part to it being in Zaporozhye and being one of the key assault areas that the Ukrainians had hoped to achieve access from this area down to Tokmak and then Melitopol in the Sea of Azov. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, just north of Verbova is the first of the Russian main defensive lines, which had been built up over the last year in preparation and readiness for such an attack. The Ukrainians were unable to get past there. They have been halted at Verbova and Robotne, and it seems now as though that front line is not really moving there, but there are continued Ukrainian assaults, and at least by Russian accounts, there is a continued withering away of the Ukrainian forces in that area. They are slowly being reinforced, but the Russians, while not making great advances in those areas, they are attriting the Ukrainian forces. And in the last few days, we are starting to get some reports of assaults from the Russians and slowly starting to gain some ground there too. In Avdiivka, let me just go to the map here. So here, Avdiivka. So this is Avdiivka, this area here. The southern areas, southern industrial areas here have now been or are being captured by the Russians. I've seen reports today that this quarry area here has now been captured. And in the north, it's Stepova here. The Russians here have reportedly stepped back, pulled back out of Stepova. This is a report I saw this morning. Due to intensifying Ukrainian shelling of Stepova. Now, you can see that this is just west of this rail line here. This is the slag heap and the coke plant just here. So for the Russians, they're trying to establish a solid presence over this railway line, looking to, if they can, establish a presence in Stepova or in Berichi. Perhaps getting here, if they can claim these settlements, then they're able to use this as a position to build up heavy equipment, tanks and what have you, to then look to make an attack down onto the coke plant from the north and from the northwest. Stepova itself is only a very small little settlement. This is about 500 meters long and 300 meters wide here. So in the perimeter around this whole area here is less than 2 kilometers. So it's not a large town at all, but again, if it's something that the Russians can hold on to, it gives them some place to perhaps build and consolidate some equipment for an attack onto the coke plant. It's also important because it then gives the Russians the ability to focus on Berichi here. Berichi with access roads down here to Orlivka. And Orlivka, as we can see, is where the main remaining supply road coming into Avdiivka is. So again, if the Russians can take Stepova and Berichi, then again they're just having more of an ability to put pressure on this supply road and to be able to attack the coke plant. So the coke plant up here is the most fortified area of Avdiivka. As you can imagine, a heavy industrial factory like this already existing with a lot of heavy and thick concrete around. No doubt some level of reinforcement and fortification has gone on. Plus, you would expect there will be some elevated positions and there will be some basements and things. So an area easier to defend than some others might be. And this is where I think ultimately the final battle for Avdiivka will end up in this coke plant area. So even while the Russians are reporting they have pulled back out of Stepovo at the moment, they are suggesting that their pressure on Avdiivka is causing more reinforcements. Reportedly, the 116th Mechanized Brigade has been transferred from Zaporozhye, and the Russians are putting pressure north of Krasnohorivka here, and extending out towards Shoretne and to Novokalinov here, through these forested areas to the south of here and through here. Now, while on this map here, oh, sorry, I wasn't doing very good at showing that to you, through these forested areas here and here, north of Krasnohorivka. Now, while these are referred to as forested areas, I just want to show you something else to give you an idea of sometimes what a forested area means. So this is, until recently, or was, a forested area. As you can see, there is very little forest left here. Even simply walking through this appears to be difficult, and whatever protection you may previously have been able to achieve in this area under the foliage of those trees is now lost. So some of these forested areas very rapidly become denuded like this. In the Kherson region, a little bit of reporting here. There was a very strong storm last night in the Black Sea. It's being reported as a 1 in 100 year size storm. Some footage I saw from Crimea was showing someone attempting to walk along a road and just being blown all over the place. Snow, blizzard-like conditions, heavy winds. Winds reportedly getting well up over 100 kilometers an hour and that sort of thing. However, in Kherson, underneath the cover of that storm, it appears that Ukrainian Marines have again tried to wedge themselves into the forest belt in the central part of Krynki. Just give me one moment. We might just jump to our map so that we can have a quick look at where this is on the map. Here we go. So this is Krynki here in the Kherson region. Now you can see that Krynki is this long, thin, rectangular area. Runs along the edge of the river, much like you would find a coastal town along a sea or an ocean. Here it is along the river side here, and then the river itself up here, the western side of the Dnieper, which Ukraine currently holds, and then the eastern side here, and in between the Konka River, the smaller Konka River, and these island areas. Now, these island areas obviously are very densely treed with vegetation, and the Ukrainians using these for cover, using them to set up things like drone repeaters to extend the range of their drones and what have you. And so reports that the Ukrainians last night are attempting to get more Marines into this area of Krynki. The report is that 2 assault groups of the 2nd Battalion and the 38th Infantry Brigade of the Ukrainian Navy secured a foothold south of the small forest and began to equip positions there. As a result of Russian artillery fire and a sortie with a reconnaissance group, the Ukrainians suffered losses and have retreated to reserve positions to the west. At the same time, east of the small forest area near the greenhouses, the assault group of the 36th Marine Brigade occupied a stronghold where they immediately came under fire. On the night during the storm, the wounded and dead were evacuated to Frolov Island, and so this is the island of Frolov Lake here. The storm, which was actually primarily over the Black Sea. Here we have our Sea of Azov, and then the Black Sea here. In Crimea, here reportedly 500,000 people have been left without power in Crimea. Reports are that it may be the largest storm recorded history in this area. 3 people have been killed. One person apparently who went down to the shoreline somewhere in Crimea to see the waves, and I'm guessing was perhaps swept away. There have been concerns that this may have been an opportunity for Ukraine to attack Crimea and the Kerch Bridge. However, at this stage, I haven't seen any reports of that having been successful. There have, however, been reports of increased activity over the Black Sea by US and NATO large reconnaissance drones. While this does happen all the time, when there have been attacks on the Kerch Strait in the past, there have often been heightened periods of additional activity of reconnaissance drones in this area. Those NATO and US or UK aircraft providing information about what's going on in this area back to the Ukrainians, often then allowing the Ukrainians to be able to launch a missile attack onto Crimea. There is thought that the reconnaissance that's been going on here at this stage will be focused on the Russian air defense and attempting to see if air defense may have been weakened because of the storm, damaged or somehow taken offline, leaving perhaps then a gap for Ukrainian missiles to be able to then strike within either the Kerch Bridge area or targets within Crimea itself. But as I say, at this stage, I've not seen reports of that successfully occurring. Moscow is reporting overnight 25 centimetres or 10 inches in the old school of snow. So we're really moving into the winter conditions here now, and the fighting will become more difficult because of that. Frostbite, as we've mentioned, will become prevalent. The ground, though, will be beginning to freeze. There has been some video footage over the last couple of weeks showing heavy equipment and trucks just buried up to the axles and beyond in mud. That will stop in the coming weeks if this temperature remains, if this cold remains like this as the ground begins to freeze, allowing for the movement of heavy vehicles and armoured equipment again. In an interesting article that I saw today, just giving an indication of what the Ukrainian civilian population is going to be looking towards this winter, in the Dnipropetrovsk area, a electricity bill provided by the electricity supplier. On there, they had little icons of home electrical items like your iron, your hairdryer, your jug, your heater, all of these things, and asking for people to look to prevent and minimize the use of these devices and electricity to prevent the enemy from taking us by surprise. Now, what that term actually means, I'm not quite sure of, but you can imagine that with the damage that was done last year to the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, with a perhaps colder winter this year than what happened last year, which was considered to be a relatively mild winter, the demand on the energy system infrastructure will be higher this year, and that in itself is likely to lead to problems if Russia decide to exacerbate that by making further missile strikes on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Then Ukrainian population and the military will be in real problems as it becomes colder, not only because they'll lack electricity, but as we've discussed, Poland at the present time, their truckers and farmers have joined forces to put a blockade on some of the major ingress and exit points of Poland into Ukraine. They are stopping the transport of fuel into that area, and it appears to be primarily humanitarian aid and some military supplies which are being allowed through, but there are reports that this is now starting to generate a shortage of fuel. Now, the Ukrainian truckers are reportedly offering their services, their transport services, cheaper than what the Polish truckers are, and the Polish truckers are protesting against this for fear of losing their own livelihoods to the Ukrainian truckers. There's possibly further problems mounting on compounding, and in terms of winter, there is reports that a kamikaze drone attack was attempted on the Yamal-Europe gas pipeline in the Tver region. Now, Tver is up northwest of Moscow. So here on our map for you just to see, here's Moscow, and Tver is just here. From memory, Tver may have been the airport around there that Yevgeny Prigozhin's doomed flight took off from. Anyhow, reports that a kamikaze drone attack was attempted on the Yamal-Europe gas pipeline. Now, this Tver area is about 560 kilometers away from the nearest Ukrainian border point. So some sizable drone has been used in that attempt. Now, it's not been successful, but had it been successful, then again, we would expect that there would be another decrease in gas reaching Europe because of this conflict. Just while we've got the map here, having a little bit of a look, out of interest, this is Finland up here. This is a Finnish border with Russia, Estonia and Latvia. Latvia and Estonia have now joined. They have joined Finland in claiming that Russia is weaponizing undocumented migrants and sending illegal immigrants from Northern Africa and the Middle East to Estonia, Latvia, and Finland. These are all NATO nations. Latvia and Estonia they both joined in 2004, and Finland joined just this year in April 2023. I don't have a great deal of information that I've found corroborating these claims at this stage. There are some reports from Finland that in the last week they've had 500 immigrants sent from Russia to the border checkpoints, which they have now closed. Interesting to see if the Russians really are doing this, and perhaps they may be, although given they've got a major military conflict going on, it seems like sort of a small fry waste of time to try to annoy those nations by doing that. Then again, I guess it does put some pressure on those nations in terms of them having to support immigrants. I think overall, the European nations are seeing a bigger problem with undocumented migrants coming in, perhaps through the likes of Greece and Italy and Spain and that sort of thing. Anyhow, but it's a different topic. Just to conclude that, Sweden, Jimmy Åkesson, who is the leader of Sweden's second largest party, the Swedish Democrats, I'm just going to quote from him. This is him speaking, not me, but he is suggesting, and again, this is just to reference the point that I think there is considered to be now a bigger problem with migrants' cultural change in Europe. So Jimmy Åkesson is saying, in the long term, we need to start confiscating and demolishing mosque buildings where anti-democratic, anti-Swedish, homophobic or anti-Semitic propaganda or general misinformation about Swedish society is spread. So this obviously a controversial topic, but something that again we're seeing in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders, who his party has just been has gained the majority of seats in the recent election. While he may struggle to form a coalition government, and it's possible that that a collection of opposing parties who oppose him may actually take power and be able to form a coalition. Wilders is another example of a northern sort of Nordic nation where they are now pushing back strongly against some of the more left-wing, open borders type policies of the EU. I think, will see that this will become a major talking point in the coming months and years in Europe, as if we take it, I guess, down a level and generalize it, as the ideological wars, the religious wars begin to form again, as we start to see conflict between the Judeo-Christian belief and the Muslim, the Islamic belief. A topic for another day, but I think we're starting to see that rise. In terms of sanctions, Hungary's Peter Szijjártó, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs and External Economic Relations, he's been at a recent meeting in Brussels with his European colleagues. He's announced that Hungary are refusing to support the recently announced 12th package of EU sanctions against Russia. They are doing this because Hungary believe that the sanctions would jeopardize the energy security of the European countries themselves. The proposed sanctions look to impose restrictions upon elements in the field of nuclear energy, as well as looking to ban the supply of Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline to Central Europe, which includes Hungary. The Druzhba pipeline, I believe, is Russian for friendship. It remains open and operating in 2023. It carries oil over 4,000 kilometres from some of the eastern parts of Russia to points in Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Austria, and Germany. An interesting side note, in the apparently classified Pentagon leaks, which I think people consider to be genuine, those documents, the Pentagon leaks documents, included the note of a conversation between the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko, in which President Zelensky suggested blowing up the Druzhba pipeline to hit Hungarian industry. And this was suggested in retaliation for Hungarian President Viktor Orban, his government being too friendly towards the Kremlin during the conflict. Now, again, I can't confirm that, but an interesting point, if it is true, does make you then think about who may have been involved in the destruction of the pipeline, Nord Stream pipeline, being developed between Germany and Russia, and why that may have happened. If President Zelensky was considering destroying this pipeline because it would then hinder Hungary, just because he was seeing Hungary as being too friendly, too close to Russia during the conflict. As a footnote to this, a Hungarian government official has stated that they believe this to be true, that Zelensky had considered this, and that the proposed sabotage by Zelensky of the Druzhba pipeline and the damage that would have done to Hungary is what had prompted Hungary to block funding of the European Peace Facility, a tool for getting funding to Ukraine. So European nations, fighting with one another, NATO nations, frictions growing between them, a number of nations, the Netherlands, Geert Wilders again, looking to stop support for Ukraine, not keen on what's happening with the EU. Germany, this is Gunnar Grobler, who is the head of Salzgitter AG, a steel manufacturer. He has stated that he believes Germany is faced with the threat of deindustrialization due to the intention of a number of the largest industrial producers in Germany to leave the country due to high energy prices. So not only are people going to struggle to keep themselves warm, and our households going to have problems affording to pay for their electricity, but now major industrial producers are just weighing up the economics and saying it's just too expensive to buy the electricity that we need in Germany to produce. It's actually cheaper for us to pick up and go and produce in another country somewhere else. Gunnar Grobler is concerned that Germany risks losing in some cases, its entire production chain in some areas of the industry. So this might be things through, in iron and steel, perhaps the actual raw processing of the iron, then the smelting of the iron, these things which are energy, electricity intense activities, those manufacturers, those industries may leave, which then means him in the higher level processing of those products may then leave, both because they are impacted by the electricity prices themselves and because their local manufacturers of those raw products may move further afield and price increases will then impact them. Systems are complex, and disrupting systems can take a long time to resolve. Shutting a system down, breaking a system can be done quite quickly. Putting all those moving pieces back together again, difficult. These systems grow over time with a lot of energy and investment. Once they break down, and once they break down in a nation, it's very difficult to start them up again. So if Germany is not careful, and it does allow this to happen, it does run the risk of deindustrialization and dropping in terms of where its position is today in terms of being a developed nation, an industrialized nation. Reportedly, over the last year, the number of German industrial companies wishing to invest abroad instead of expanding production domestically within Germany has doubled from 16% to 32%. So a doubling in the number of German industrial companies who are now looking to invest overseas, set up factories overseas, buy companies overseas, move their production overseas, rather than investing domestically. moving on from Europe's problems with energy and money to reportedly Volodymyr Zelensky's challenges with money. Now, this story I'll tell you about because there are a number of different sources reporting it. Obviously, I can't confirm if it is true or not, but there are reports that President Zelensky has purchased 2 yachts worth $75 million. One of them is called Lucky Me, and the other one is called My Legacy. These yachts have reportedly been registered to Boris and Serhiy Shefir. And these men are reportedly trusted confidants of the president of Ukraine. They have previously founded some businesses together, and the younger brother, Serhiy, was appointed the first assistant to the president after his victory in the elections. The reporting is saying that these two have been involved in some previous similar type of activity or schemes where perhaps they have been the front men for other people purchasing things. In 2021, the International Corruption Research Centre reported that Serhiy Shefir was involved in Zelensky's offshore network, and that a month before winning the election, President Zelensky rewrote his offshore assets into Sergei's name. So, if this manages to be proven in some way, this looks very bad for President Zelensky, particularly as his nation is suffering so badly because of his inability to halt the fighting, accept the loss, and save the youth of his country. His desire to continue fighting is going to cause people to frown upon the news that he has purchased himself $75 million worth of yachts, if this story is in fact correct. Now, the conflict between him and General Zelensky, who has been commanding the Ukraine armed forces in this conflict, also seems to be heating up but taking an unusual turn. Reports from President Zelensky's camp is that General Zelensky's staff have been leaking information to Telegram channels, leaking negative information about President Zelensky. And that in the last week or so, there has been talk about him possibly losing his position. Today, however, I've seen reporting, and this has come from a Telegram channel called Resident. Now, Resident is a Ukrainian channel, and I find their reporting to generally be reliable. They're often quite critical of Ukraine. So while they are Ukrainian, they're certainly not a heavily pro-Ukrainian channel in their bias. They are suggesting that Bankova, or President Zelensky's administration, intends now to postpone the issuing of General Zelensky's resignation or his firing. And this is because of the perceived reaction in the Ukrainian society and in the armed forces of Ukraine. They've apparently done the surveying and have weighed it up, and they feel that if they were to get rid of Zelensky now, they would lose too much support in the general population and in the army, more importantly, where Zelensky seems to have a relatively good following from the army in general. The thought is that if he were fired, that there might be a general revolt by the army, people deserting and just surrendering and giving up, I guess, is what they're trying to avoid. Another interesting point is that the main concern from President Zelensky's administration about General Zelensky is not the failure of the offensive, which started in June, or the reported lack of an offensive plan for 2024. And the reports coming out that Zelensky may have gone against Zelensky's desires and may actually have been sending some resources to do some defensive reinforcement because he could see what is coming, even though Zelensky has said focus on Avdiivka and Bakhmut. Perhaps Zelensky has actually been doing some reinforcing. It's not for those reasons, not that because there's been the failure in the offensive. More so, reportedly, this is from the Ukrainian channel, is that the conflict is due to the fact that Zelensky's political ambitions or his failure to support President Zelensky in his ongoing campaign to remain as president is what has caused the conflict. Now, President Zelensky has cancelled the 2024 elections in Ukraine, reportedly because, again, they've done the polling and there's no way that he would be able to carry an election. He would be out. So given that he's in war and he's currently president, he's using that to his advantage to stave off having those elections until he hopes at some stage in the future things will look better for him and he'll be able to have those elections and be re-elected. That, I imagine, though, is looking more and more unlikely as time goes on. Moving on, perhaps from Ukraine, and just a little bit about Israel. Another Ukrainian channel reporting here that aid to Ukraine from the United States is being sharply reduced and will continue to decline. And Samuel Sharap, who is an expert with the RAND Center, research think tank in the States, has confirmed this. He believes that support is leading to political friction within Western countries. This is support for Ukraine. And in 2024, it will become harder and harder for Kiev to receive more money from the Biden administration. He suggested there is no longer such sympathy for Ukraine on the part of the American society as at the beginning of the military conflict. That single sentence there is perhaps the most damning thing for President Zelensky. If the general support for the conflict is lost by the American public, that means it's not something that will get Biden voted in, which means that Biden will look to drop it. He has said that it may now be beneficial for Biden to merge Ukraine and Israel and bundle them up as into the war activities and then perhaps look to drop them both in the coming months with a shift towards American domestic policy and problems by Biden. One of the big points that you see on social media at the moment by the general population and particularly by Republicans is the screaming of why are the US tax dollars being spent overseas on weapons for fights that don't directly impact Americans. America is nowhere near Israel. America is nowhere near Ukraine. So Biden, his administration, doing the numbers, starting to perhaps move to a position where they will look to, if possible, drop the war support and the war rhetoric and do a big push in the media on how they are now spending all this money on America and fixing America's problems. And we might start to see things in democratic states like in California, where President Xi Jinping was there for a meeting a couple of weeks ago, how the apparently unmovable homeless tent cities in the streets of Los Angeles and California were miraculously cleaned up and replaced with planter boxes full of fresh plants and flowers. So that type of thing we might start to see in the coming months. At least this is what Samuel Charap of the RAND Center is suggesting is likely to happen here. Now, with Israel being merged with Ukraine and put away on the back burner, perhaps I think what's more likely is Ukraine will be put on the back burner. I think it's going to be more difficult for Israel to be put on the back burner by the US for other issues that we've talked about in the past, but primarily due to the very strong support for Israel within Washington, which again is due in part to the strength of the Israeli lobbying ability within America. Now, the truce that has been agreed between Hamas and Israel to allow for the release of prisoners captured by Hamas on October the 7th, this has been happening and is looking to be extended for 2 more days, which will take it out to about 6 days in total. There has been some sporadic eruptions of activity during the truce, but overall it seems to have been relatively well adhered to. There are some reports today of some smoke and possible explosions in Israel outside of Gaza. At this stage, though, I haven't had clarification as to what has caused that. This may be just some regular incident or accident, or it may be that it is some limited Hamas rocket attacks going on. Anyhow, so far in the reporting that I have seen, the Israeli and foreign nationals who have been released by Hamas have appeared to have been in good health. They appear to have been treated well. In one Western report I saw written about it, where they obviously were trying to play up the negatives. Their negatives were that these people sometimes were left alone for long periods of time. They sometimes had to wait hours for food, and that was it. There wasn't any report in there of torture, being maltreated, being abused in any way. Now, I'm not saying this is the case for all, but I would have suspected that if there were evidence of that having happened, that sort of maltreatment of Israeli and foreign prisoners, hostages, that we would have heard a lot of this. Surprisingly, in the video that I saw of hostages being returned, they were holding hands with the Hamas fighters who were returning them, waving goodbye, seeming happy. Interesting, gives you the impression that they had been relatively well cared for during the period while they were hostages. So not excusing them being hostages, but there doesn't seem to be indication that they were badly treated during that period of time. That may change, but that's how it seems at the moment. In the Gulf of Aden, so there has been, I might just move the map here for us. So there has been some activity here. Let's just get our map in a little bit closer. So the Gulf of Aden down here, the Red Sea here to the west of Saudi Arabia, Gulf of Aden to the south, Gulf of Oman, and the Persian Gulf over here on the east. On Sunday, there was an attempted hijacking of a commercial vessel called the Central Park. The USS destroyer USS Mason responded to an SOS. It had been, it seems, effectively hijacked. When this initially happened on Sunday, Yemen's government in Aden blamed the country's Iran-backed Houthi rebels for the attack. However, the rebels did not acknowledge or claim responsibility for the attack. There was a response given by the leader of Ansar Allah movement, Mohammed al-Bukhasti, and his statement was along the lines of the United States had fabricated the story of saving a commercial ship from the hands of militants in the Gulf of Aden. Reportedly, there were a number of hijackers captured and who were convinced to disembark the Central Park commercial vessel. They attempted to leave in their boat, and they were then captured by the forces of the USS Mason. This is Muhammad al-Bukhati, went on to say that they only target ships belonging to the Zionist entity, in his terms, and that they warn the rest of the countries of the consequences of intercepting their armed forces, so the Houthi forces. What came out today was that Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Patrick Ryder said, "We're continuing to assess, but initial indications are that these 5 individuals are Somali and not Yemeni Houthis." Reportedly, at the time that the hijacking was going on, however, 2 ballistic missiles were fired by Houthis in the general direction of the destroyer USS Mason. They missed the Mason. So this now a second hijacked ship within the Middle Eastern region. The first one in the Red Sea, hijacked by the Houthis with their helicopter landing, which we spoke about a couple of episodes ago. If you haven't seen the footage of that, it's interesting footage to watch. This one, though, apparently not the Houthis at all, but Somali hijackers involved in this one, although reports of perhaps some Houthi activity around the area at the time, which is difficult to confirm. Now, just one last point here I will finish up on, again to do with a ship, but this is a ship in the Mediterranean. This is a ship called the Raptor, a freighter vessel, which sank off the coast of Lesvos on Sunday. There was 1 confirmed fatality, 1 survivor, and 12 crew members are still missing. This may be a complete nothing burger, or it may turn out to be an interesting story, and it's just got a little bit of a feel to that at the moment. And I'll go on because there's a little bit of backstory here. This ship 2 years ago was perhaps blacklisted because the crew's documents were declared invalid and false entries were found in the oil record book. The findings suggest the ship may have been engaged in illegal, undeclared routes, possibly involved in smuggling. According to some sources here, their suspicions are heightened by the fact that the rescued sailor informed Greek Coast Guard officials that the ship's final destination was Ukraine and that Istanbul was to be a refueling stop. This is combined with details that the crew did not seek assistance on Saturday when the ship began signs of taking in water. Instead, they waited until Sunday morning just prior to the sinking to request help. Additionally, it's been reported that the same shipping company owned the Manassa Row, which sank in the Bay of Kissamos, northwestern Crete, in January 2022. And back then, authorities filed charges against crew members for causing a shipwreck and smuggling tobacco products. Just an interesting one. As I say, it may be nothing, or it may take on a larger life. But the idea that a boat has sunk, which may have been intended to go to Ukraine, which has previously been considered to be involved in smuggling, having a sister ship which also sank under unusual circumstances where it may have been smuggling products. Who knows? Might be all we hear of it, but maybe there is some more to it. Let's wait and see. Anyhow, thank you very much if you've watched the show this far. I hope you're enjoying the episodes. If you're enjoying and you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe and share with people that you think might enjoy the channel. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.